What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Hey, everybody. Today's guest is one of the most innovative people in the architectural field. He's president and one of the owners at Mancini Duffy. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Christian Giordano.
Well, thank you, Dan, for having me.
Well, thank you. It's been, this podcast medium has been, I've been a huge fan for a long time. I've always thought about doing it. And one of the decision points in doing this is you and your AntiArchitect podcast. Knowing you and seeing you do it and looking at the product, I was like, oh, wow, this is really great. And like, they're just conversations that I enjoy listening to. So I thank you for being here.
Wow. That's a huge compliment. Thank you. Starting the podcast was something that I had thought about for a while, but then kind of had to be forced into it because I didn't really think I had a point of view. But then in talking to, my partners here and some others around, specifically the two ladies that from Brand Groupies that run our social media, Carrie and Lauren, they said to me, no, we can make it easy for you. We have a guy that'll help you kind of start it and set it all up and all that stuff. And I said, okay. And they, we came up with this idea of, the AntiArchitect, but not necessarily in a bad way, but more about being a critical voice in the world of architecture and looking at it. What do we do well? What do we not do well? How do we treat certain clients versus others? How do we work with our engineers or our sales partners or, people like you that supply, furniture and goods and all different parts of our industry, and how can we better improve the way we do everything? And it really started to kind of make sense. It became a positive thing. I mean, using the title, the AntiArchitect, obviously is to be catchy. And most people seem to get it. Although some people say, why are you so anti-architects? And I go, but I'm not. I am one. And I love architects and architecture. Don't you get it? It's
well, so speaking specifically to that as being the anti-architect, like walk us through what you mean by that. Like, what do you mean, the anti-architect?
So, I always fancy myself as the type of person that comes at the architecture profession a little bit differently than most architects, right? Many sort of the way that your schooling and your education is in architecture school, you're taught almost to become a superstar architect, that if you don't become a star architect or a black cape architect, whatever you want to call them, then, well, you probably are not worthy of the business. You failed in the business. You're never going to reach your potential. Everyone should strive to be that. And while I think there was part of me that always thought about being that, the reality is you get a job in a corporate. Most people get a job in a corporate architecture firm, especially if you're around a big city like I am in New York City. If you're in a more suburban market, chances are you're working for a small, maybe even sole practitioner. Maybe you go out on your own and you are a sole practitioner. But for the most part, most people don't become black cape superstar architects. And it's kind of a shame that the education system kind of sets you up to be that, and maybe in a lot of people's mind, failure. So I was always comfortable with the idea of working on large corporate projects. And in my case, it was, whether that was office space or broadcast space or hotels, kind of big buildings, always interiors involved in some way. I was always okay with that. And I think that the profession, they, as you kind of mature in these corporate firms, the art and architecture begins to kind of go away, and you get you get a few disgruntled architects along the way, and you get some people that try to force their design ideas on clients. And I've always been the type from the very beginning that liked to listen to the client and like to really understand what they were all about, really get in their heads, and then also understand their business. What I find so fascinating about this business is that you get involved with some of the top people in the industry, in the world, really, in any company, right? I mean, I sat in meetings with Bob Iger at Disney because we were doing a building for Disney, for a broadcast building for their biggest television station in Philly. And he had a vested interest in this project, and he wanted to know why we were spending money here, what was happening here. It was going to be a showpiece for them. So you get this access to these decision makers that, no, most normal people don't ever get, and they become just another person at the table and another interested party. And I always found that really fascinating that you got this kind of access, but you've got to really understand their business. If you're not a black cape architect, you can't go in and say, here are all of my ideas for you. And now you're going to take them and you're going to love them because, I'm the artist and you're going to listen to me. That's not the case for most. And you've got to really pay attention and listen and understand what they want. And from that, it can be very rewarding. You can actually find some amazing, beautiful designs. I mean, take Gensler, our biggest competitor, the largest firm in the world. They find success in really listening to their clients. And while they are a very corporate architecture firm, they do arguably some of the most innovative work in the world. I mean, some of their base building and towers that they do are absolutely extraordinary. And that's coming from a corporate firm, and this idea that, maybe the greater whole of the firm, that sort of power in numbers becomes more important or more powerful than the individual soul, superstar. So the idea of the anti-architect is really, well, I'm not looking at it from, the architect is the all-knowing, and that every time the architect walks in the room, you've got to bow to them and you've got to, have all this reverence for them. They're just another person in there. They've got to listen. And for me, I've always done it a little bit differently, the way that my career has evolved. And so I like to think of myself as a little bit of a different kind of architect along the way.
So I really love, and what resonated the most with me is this idea of listening, right? Because when I think of that star architect, I've never actually heard the term black cape architect before, but I like that. It's like the superhero, the star architect, or like someone's coming to Gotham, like watch out. Um, Part of what makes them so successful is their intense vision and like, this is where I'm going, and all of you fall by the wayside because I'm gonna get here, right? And it's made for some amazing monuments, right?
Oh, absolutely.
When I think about listening and hearing, oftentimes I feel like there's a disconnect between that star architect and listening. And it's actually a great segue, um, because in doing all of these podcasts about defining hospitality, I've been getting so many different responses that have just been really giving me a much deeper 360-degree view. But like, listening has a lot to do with that as far as what I'm hearing, because it's like, it's opening up. So for you, how do you define hospitality?
So it's a good question. So purely thinking about hospitality, not thinking about kind of what I do or what we do here as a firm in terms of designing, hotels or restaurants and things like that. When I think of hospitality, I think of the Four Seasons, the hotel, the Four Seasons, and that service model. And Isidore Sharp is the creator of the Four Seasons, right? And his idea that the service was going to be so extraordinary in these hotels, no matter where you went in the world. Everything was going to be fabulous about them, from your experience, from the moment you arrived to the moment you left, and everything in between, from the food to the service to the actual physical place, right? And when I think about my experience, you know, Not that I stay at a lot of Four Seasons, but when I have, they, they really do, you pull up the first, the person up front asks you, if you're checking in and what your name is. And from that moment on, they know your name everywhere you go. And obviously they're very well trained and they're very well thought out about how they do that. And if you need a towel or you need something, it's never a question as to why or, I just brought you one 5 minutes ago. I mean, they will continuously service and service and service. And I think that model, what I found fascinating when I read the Steve Jobs book was that he used the Four Seasons as his model for Apple in terms of the stores. That idea that you didn't have to wait online, that someone was there to greet you all the time, that you didn't have to go and check out in a long line, that there was always someone there to be, you know, it's basically a hospitality experience in a tech store. And so when I think of hospitality, that's what I think of. I think of really amazing service.
I love the idea of really amazing service. And also, it made me think that on the listening side, some of the things that you said, it wasn't actually listening and connecting, but there's also a level of anticipation, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm curious from you, that idea of listening and hearing what your customer wants and knowing their name and going right through to like anticipation. How how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah. So part of what we do as designers, right, is um, we do listen. And then we do, I don't care if you are that star architect or you are, a corporate architect, at some point you have to also put your point of view and your design ideas on paper and, let them be out there for someone to react to. So when I think of the anticipation side, I think of, we give our clients a series of very controlled options, right? We never want to say to a client, sit in front of them and say, "So what are you looking for?" We want to come in and we want to ask the client, "So what's important to you? What are the emotions you're trying to create when someone, if we're talking about a hotel, when someone walks into your hotel, what's the experience level? What do you feel like when you're in a room, in a space, when you're in a restaurant? What is the mood like? What's the lighting like?" And usually, especially in the hospitality world, the clients are able to tell you that right away. Sometimes they can't articulate it in terms of, well, I want it to be, X amount of brightness, or I like this, but they'll say, well, I'm thinking, I was at this restaurant and this is the kind of feel I have, or I like the softness of these textures and these materials. And so with some of those cues, we start to put together this idea of, what are the overall drivers for the design? And then we start to curate that design and curate options that we feel are in that spirit. So by the next time we meet with someone, um, we're able to say to them, these are the things that we found important in what you said, and we were listening. And this is how we think of it when we come back to you with options, and we give them a series of options. Again, it's never a blank page. We never want to say to someone, you do it, because then what do you need us for, right? It's here's what we're thinking. And we always give the sort of, we've adapted it overall now because we use technology more in how we're designing, but we always give sort of the small, medium, and large version. And we started this a few years back where we actually put, because budget is always a concern. And it's something that architects don't actually do very well, is talk about money up front for themselves, for their fee, and for the client also in terms of what they're getting. Um, Again, if we had an endless budget, we would have a blast. This would be a totally different conversation. But budget is always important. I don't care who the client is. So what we started to do is actually put very simple dollar signs on drawings. So if we were making big moves, we would associate that with very large dollar signs. If we were making smaller moves, more controlled ideas or more controlled interventions, we start putting smaller dollar signs and somewhere in between. And from there and from the reactions, you start to have early conversations about options and, well, this one is that we really like this, but I see that you think it's expensive. But what is it in that you just showed us that we can use from an idea point of view, and then put it in a more controlled version where we could save a little bit money? What's that big idea that we like in there? How can we then adapt it and save some money along the way? So it's those kind of, little tricks that we've learned that really help kind of move decision making forward. Because in the end, decision making is the hardest part for the client.
So just so I'm clear, when you're in an early schematic or design development stage, you're going through, and on your renderings or concepts, you're actually putting the dollar signs on those drawings so that they're seeing it.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at them and anticipating.
Yeah. So if we're doing a building, if it's a new hotel and we're going to show it as all glass, we're going to put a, certain size dollar sign. If we're going to show it as punched windows, it's going to have different size dollar signs on it. And again, it's all about that decision-making process to understand what is it that we're driving toward here. If a budget is always a thing, so how are we going to get the best design for their budget? We want it to be super designed. We want it to be the Four Seasons. But if the budget isn't the Four Seasons, how can we still find what's important to that client and make it a reality?
Yeah, I've heard two schools of thought here. One is like, okay, give us a budget and we're going to work within it. And then the other one is, we don't want to work within a budget. We want to show the world, show the dream, and then we can back into it. And I love what you're saying, where oftentimes owners are uncomfortable talking about the money. They're building a big building, but I'm really intrigued by how you bring the dollars right to the front at the early stage, like visually represented.
Yeah.
How did you learn that?
Honestly,
Where did that come from?
So we were doing a very large corporate park in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it was a massive project. And in order to put budget numbers to it, we had an outside consultant doing budget numbers, and the budgets were the numbers were so big. The smallest thing that we were doing was probably $1 million, right? And there were things all the way up to 30, 40, $50 million because it was such a huge scale of a project that it was actually one of my designers here that he was trying to articulate to the client, well, these are the things you could do for around this range. And these are the things that you can do these are the other things here that we're also proposing. And so that's where we came up with, why don't we just put these large and small dollar signs on everything so that when they looked at it in an overall master plan, they could see like, oh, I see. So if we take down that whole building and put up that new building there, that's a big dollar sign. But if we do all these little other interventions, it's about this amount of money, right? And so we were able to sort of quickly have that conversation. And then they were able to go back to their board and say, hey, it looks like these are the ranges that we're getting for these types of things. What realistically are we telling the architects to do? Because clearly we're not going to do all of this, but we need to do something. So where are we actually going to fall?
And when you're presenting these drawings with the dollar signs, is it someone's looking at it there? Is someone else watching the client, or are you like, how does that happen? And I assume you're keying in on their body language and kind of go.
Yeah, we're always, a lot of times that's my job. So that, the designer's presenting and the project manager is talking, and I'm trying to read the room and really kind of understand how the reactions are going along the way. And so you can clearly see, people think, oh my God, I love that. I have to have it. I don't care how much it costs.
So tell us about a time when you had the big grand, like the big budget thing. You're like, oh, this is the vision. This is where I really think it is. Based on previous conversations with the owner, you anticipated that, but then you saw the reaction and then like changed course. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, so I would say actually a good example is a hotel that we were doing in New York City on 31st Street. It was the Arlo Hotel. They had tremendous ideas, tremendous ideas. And when we conceptualized the building, we ultimately got it approved. It was a brand new building out of the ground, about 300 or so keys. And the project, it it had over budget written all over it from the very beginning. But they wanted to be more of a boutique brand. And so same kind of thing we would present. And one of the things that we presented was a glass at the top, the very top, a rooftop bar, and it had a glass floor that kind of overlooked Fifth Avenue. And very
I've
cool.
been there, but I don't remember the floor.
So it's funny. A lot of buildings these days have glass floors overlooking stuff, but I want to say I think we were one of the first. And that was one of the things where we started talking about budget right away. Like, hey, this is probably outside the budget, but we really thought this was a cool idea. And I remember watching the client going, you know what? Like, we have to have this. I don't care what it is. Like, we're going to make sure we have it. We're going to go back and ask for more money, or we're going to take something else out. But this is a must. And I remember us almost like making excuses as we would go. Sometimes designers, we know we've done a good job designing, but then you start to get a little nervous about how the client might react. So you backtrack even in what you're saying. And I remember saying to our designer at the time, no, don't back out. He wants this. We got to make this glass bridge, this glass ceiling or glass roof here happen for him. And he said, oh, okay, well, then that's what we'll do, and we were able to figure it out, and that thing got built, and it's still there today. That's one of their highlights of that project.
Wow. Maybe I've just been there when it's also crowded up there and I just didn't see it. But mostly I think I've been in every room there because I did all the furniture and all the rooms, but
Nice.
I've definitely been in every.
Those are tiny rooms.
Yeah.
Those are
really beat up.
Yeah. The bed is like right up against the window.
Totally. That's like a new thing. This whole micro hotel has been coming on, just packing more stuff in there. And then when people come into New York City with all their bags, it's just a lot to fit in there. So the hearing about all of this and how you're doing it with your clients, like when are you most comfortable? Either traveling, at work, in life, like what makes you really relaxed and very comfortable?
That is a really good question. Before COVID, I probably could have answered that a lot differently. Because I would say now post COVID, I don't think I'm comfortable at all. I'm still waiting for the next, thing to happen. But where I will say that, we're a very flexible organization here. We have about 75, 80 or so people that work at the firm. We've always been, it's a young firm. I mean, the firm's been around 100 years, but my ownership's really, in the last 8 to 10 years. And the staff has really changed, and it's a young, kind of fun organization. Um, we were always flexible. We allowed people to work from home if they had to. We really didn't have let's call it a policy for that, but we let people do as they must. And my philosophy was always, if you got your work done, it didn't matter what time you did it at. If you showed up here at 9 or you showed up here at noon, doesn't matter to me as long as it works for you and your team and you get everything done. So when COVID hit, and we were not allowed to basically go back into our office. I mean, in New York City. And, this is a place where I come day after day and pretty much only knew getting up, going on the train and going into the office. And when we weren't allowed to go back into the city for 2 months, it was very nerve-wracking. I mean, I didn't understand how, from a cultural point of view, we were going to keep the place going. And what we did was, we implemented 2 times a week, all in Zoom meetings. And, we did these all in Zoom meetings, everyone turned on their cameras from home. And I pretty much led it 2 times a week for an hour. And there was, most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, there was absolutely no agenda. We just kind of all were in our little, cubes, and we just chatted and we asked questions, and we just, maybe even made fun of each other and made fun of somebody's backgrounds, or kids would come in. And what I realized is where I am most comfortable is actually with a group of people. I am not an on my own kind of guy. So to answer that question, I'm actually most comfortable in the office, as bizarre as that may sound, because I like the interactivity with everybody. I like, when people are around, I like the impromptu meetings. I sit a desk over from my director of marketing and strategy, and he and I, talk nonstop. There's always something, there's always a proposal, there's always an idea, there's always, a reason for us to interact. And I missed all of that during COVID. So it's really good to be back. And we've been very sort of nonchalant about how to come back to the office. We said, please start coming back. And I will tell you, the office is probably about 75% full now on a regular basis. So I think others feel that way too. That interaction is important.
So something else you said resonated with me was where there was almost like this, I got this fear from you that you could lose the culture. And in any business, like building culture is one of the hardest things to do. Obviously,
Yeah.
you have to be profitable and do all that, but building a culture. So if you think about as the culture that you have, or just even in your daily life, how do you make others feel comfortable? I know you're comfortable around people, but how do you make other people feel comfortable?
So I think from an office point of view, or from a business point of view, and with colleagues, the way that I think making them feel comfortable is giving them giving their ideas real merit, and letting people have the freedom to do what they think is important. So whether that is a design idea, sort of no matter what level you're at. So I'll tell you that the design directors here are very interactive with their team. So the junior designer, the person right out of school, the intern, we welcome the ideas. We welcome all of that commentary or solutions. And so kind of hearing people and making sure that their voice is heard is really, really important. And then for me, my success has always been, kind of putting people in seats that they're not quite ready to fill. I was never a believer that if we go back to the sort of the anti-architect, right, that the old guy is the guy that has all the answers, and I never subscribed to that. So in our firm, if you have an idea, we're here to listen, and we've proven that. So there was someone here that wanted to start a what we call the final layer of design, MDLX, the Mancini Duffy Lux brand. So it was an idea that she had, sourcing things like in hotel rooms, as a matter of fact, the pads and pens, and where the shoehorn is, and the pillows, the artwork, the plant programs. Those were all things that they felt comfortable enough. Two designers here felt comfortable enough coming to me and saying, we have this idea. We want to start a separate company within Mancini Duffy, and this is what it's all about. Here's our business plan. What do you think we can do? And so we started it, and they've been very successful. And they have their own line of business. They have their own separate bank accounts, their own separate P&L, and they manage and do this entire process themselves. And they've done a bunch of hotel fit outs and even office place fit outs in terms of artwork and all of the sort of accessories that go into some of the spaces that we design. But it was all them, and they felt comfortable enough to come and essentially ask for permission, but then come with a plan. And then we supported them with, obviously, financially, we supported them in getting it started. Same with the technology side. People have come with ideas on technology, and we've ended up hiring programmers. And we have 3 programmers that work in our research and development lab, and they're developing software for us. And it was the same thing. They felt comfortable enough to come to me, to come to my partners and say, these are our ideas. You talk about wanting to support us. This is how we plan to do it. And we did that. And so I think the more we've shown that it's not talk like, hey, I'm approachable, come talk to me. It's, hey, I'm approachable, I want to hear your ideas. And all these other people that did that well, now they have lines of business to show as a result.
And it's almost as if you're, again, going back to that listening, you're listening to their idea. You're not pigeonholing them. You're believing in them, and
Yeah.
and you're not putting them in that seat that they should be in. It's like, hey, let's lean into it a bit. And I believe in you. And that's a pretty astounding way to make people feel comfortable believing in them. I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Hmm. Um, Oftentimes, so we're talking about what makes people feel comfortable and how you make people feel comfortable, but sometimes like the most uncomfortable things or the worst experience of hospitality being delivered, um, can inform us in even greater ways. And I know the first time that I met you, we shared a business coach, Mark Green. He was awesome. He was amazing. But I will say, in those first couple of meetings with him, when I was meeting with the leadership team and talking about what we need to do, or he was asking, okay, what are the priorities? They would start speaking and I would finish their sentences. And I remember he tore me a new one. He's like, Dan, you have great people around you. You got to shut the fuck up and listen to them. And I was like, ooh. And then every monthly meeting that we had with him, I did not look forward to, but I grew so much out of it. So I just wanted to share that one. But also, if you think about how did the worst experience of hospitality inform your path in life or your journey in life?
Yeah. So that's interesting. I would say that on the hospitality side, if I'm taking my own experience, it always comes down to dining, right? I think that, a stay in a room or a stay in a place, a lot of times that stuff gets resolved and, that's that kind of thing. It's usually a dining experience um, that to me never, will always stand out as not a great experience in the hospitality world. And again, it comes down to service. Yeah, you can have bad food and yeah, that kind of thing. And a lot of that is subjective in the end. But it comes down to the service. How are those people treating the patrons? How are they interacting? How responsive are they? And I think of a restaurant experience in the same way I think of our clients in a sense, right? That we have to respond to them a certain way. We always have to be positive, right? You never want to tell a client, no, you're wrong. No, that's ridiculous. I mean, as many times as you may want to, that's not really our place. I always found our place to be, we have to come back with a solution. If they're not happy or they don't think this is correct, well, then it's not on them, it's on us to find the right solution. And most of the time, I will say we do. I think I take that approach on a lot of things is, well, maybe it's me. And I think if you take that approach, well, it's not them. So what am I doing wrong? How can I make this situation better? Because think about it, if you're in a situation and someone is beating up on you the entire time, you kind of lose interest in it and it's no fun anymore. So that level of trying to figure out what is it that I can do to improve the situation always helps in that. And I think our clients appreciate that. We don't say you're wrong or no, that's impossible. No, that won't fit over there. Don't you understand scale? You know, we will say no, let us take a look at it and give you some options. And usually that works. But I will say about Mark Green, I mean, he would make me feel uncomfortable a lot too. I mean, holy cow. Yeah, he's the kind of guy that I again love him too. Um, he I felt like if I didn't have the right answer, I was going to just get, absolutely bludgeoned by him. But what that I did realize is that if I started being a little bit more honest, like, I just don't know, I don't have the answer to that. He actually cracked and would say, that's the right answer. You don't know, that kind of thing.
100%. And that's actually, as uncomfortable as those interactions were in the beginning, I had tremendous growth. Like we all grow from being uncomfortable. And I guess
Yeah.
that's like the genesis of that question. Like uncomfortable situations help us all grow and learn and not repeat the mistakes of the past. Um, so as we're going and business is starting to pick up, travel is starting to pick up. occupancies are ticking up, residential is happening. Things are happening. Um, as we move through this pandemic, what's keeping you up at night now? Because I think we all see the light at the end of the tunnel, um, and we see at the beginning of a new cycle. But what's keeping you up?
So I think what keeps me up is, in a sense, right? Part of it's exciting, and part of it is will keep me up at night, right? And maybe they're both the same thing. I guess keeping up at night doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing.
Mhm.
Um, but for a company like ours that is in New York City, right? I mean, that is the bulk of our work, and while we do work nationally, and we are certainly expanding nationally, um, the mothership is still New York, and it's really we're a New York institution. Everybody in our field knows Mancini Duffy and what we do. Um, and in the very beginning, I was pretty convinced that nobody was ever going back to an office. And 50% of our work is corporate office space. And, we're very, very good at it. As good as we are at hotels and hospitality and restaurants and some of the other kinds of work that we do, we're really good at corporate office work. And I think that is our identity, right? And it's where a lot of our connections are and many of our clients are. And in the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed like nobody was ever going to go back to an office. And now what's great, and I think what's very exciting for me in terms of office space is, and then this is what keeps me up at night, is the excitement of the fact that every client now doesn't have to follow the trend that they thought they had to follow. So before it was every tech and media company wanted to have, an open office plan, huddle rooms, phone booths, I mean, we could design this stuff with our eyes closed, right? A green wall here, or the digital thing there, or the whole thing, right? And we've done hundreds of them and they're beautiful. Um, a law firm wants their perimeter offices, their corner offices, their interior offices, and so on and so forth, right? But now what's kind of nice is that there are no more trends to follow in that sense. What I keep telling our corporate clients is you've got to really think about what works for you. What is your return to work plan? Are you coming in 5 days a week? Are you coming in 3 days a week? If hoteling, which basically means, you're sharing desks, are you comfortable with doing that? Are your employees comfortable in doing that? Have you really thought about how you want to work? Is your office an office for heads down work, or is it more collaborative? Is it more, do you really need phone booths now to make private phone calls because, people can do that from home? So it really becomes about, if the users of their office space can really start to think about how they truly want to function, what's true to them and their culture, we can then really start getting some different types of spaces emerging from this. They're not going to all be cookie cutter, because not one size does not fit all anymore at all. It really becomes very individualized, which is exciting and interesting, and just a different way of approaching office. It's actually probably a totally different way than it's ever been done before when you really think about it.
I think it's a tremendous seismic shift in culture and staffing. And almost like, if you think about this idea of hoteling or 5 days, 3 days, as like a Tetris game of like, how do you program that to really work? I think okay, schematically, it's going to be interesting, but also culturally, the workplace, I think, will be forever changed in a really good way, especially, I believe, in creative fields. So whether it's architects, designers, advertising, um, those hours and time, it's like creativity doesn't happen 9 to 5. It happens at other times. How are you seeing that happen? How are you seeing that evolve?
It's true. I mean, our staff in general, right? They love, some of my most creative people will tell you, you know, they love working from home. They never realized how much they enjoyed it, because the way that they can schedule their week is meetings and clients, but then that downtime, that quiet time, that they can do it on their own. Because as a designer, right, you've got to really think things through. And And what I would always say to, as growing up as a designer and my wife in the field as well, she moved to the sales side pretty early on in our careers. But um, I'd always say to her, I have work to do this weekend. I probably still say that. I have work to do this weekend. And she'd say, well, we're not doing this and this until then. So you probably have about an hour or so to do it. And I said, but I don't I don't need an hour. I need 8 hours, 10 hours, 16 hours uninterrupted where I need to sit and focus and draw and sketch and or research or read. There's all these every designer designs in their own way. And I think the flexibility in the office now gives them that ability. Oh, those are going to be my days where I can actually think about design rather than just production and just doing and doing and doing. Design in the end is a lot of production, but you've got to have that upfront thought time and that quiet time to actually think it through.
I totally see that and get that. And I can't wait to see the changes that are coming. So now that we've learned from you, now shifting gears to kind of learning more about you, you're a young guy, you're an entrepreneur. Somehow you own 100-year-old architecture firm. Like, how did that happen? Like, what's your entrepreneurial journey on that?
Uh, so I've told the story a few times. I mean, basically, it comes down to just asking the right questions. But so I went to architecture school, my University of Miami in Florida, and then I went to UCLA in Los Angeles. I specifically went to UCLA to have Frank Gehry as a professor and Morphosis Tom Mean as a professor. So those are all back to the whole star architect thing, and I love those two guys and really admire them. And I never really wanted to work in Los Angeles. I liked living there, but I'm not a West Coast kind of person for some reason. It just never felt right. So I wanted to move back to the East Coast, and I got a job at Swanky Hayden Connell Architects, which was a big architecture firm at the time. They're no longer around. All the partners kind of went their separate ways, and many retired. But it's where I met my wife, and she was an interior designer there, and I was working on buildings there. And I worked there for about 5 years and enjoyed it. And one of the design directors went over to a big company called HLW International, big firm all over the world. And that's really where I spent the bulk of my career and really learned kind of how to do my job. And what was great about them was I had exposure very early on to a lot of different aspects of the firm, from quickly moving into the leadership roles there, running a studio, to running the architectural design side. I had a lot of exposure in China, so I would go back and forth to Shanghai because we had an office there, or they still have an office there, and we would do a lot of work there. And so I got to see a lot of variety of project types, from interiors to, corporate to hotel to you name it. I mean, they do it all. And I enjoyed my time there very much. I still have some very close friends there. But I was working on a project for HBO, and I was friendly with one of the project managers, and he said to me, "Hey, there's there's this guy, big architecture firm in New York that, I think you'd get along with him. They're looking for a young guy to come over and kind of change the culture of the firm. And, you might be the right guy." So I said, well, I'm not really interested. So I went and I met Ralph Mancini, and Ralph was an extraordinary guy. I mean, really like lit up the room. I've told this story before, but what I loved about Ralph is that he didn't have a desk in the office. He just walked around and just sat wherever he felt like it and chatted with everybody.
The original hoteler.
Yeah, the original hoteler. Yeah. It was amazing. And, he spent most of his time out with clients and doing his thing. And then he would come back and, just kind of chit chat with everybody. And that was it. He didn't do email. He didn't do any of that stuff. I'm so envious of that kind of life. The no email life sounds amazing. So, and so I met, I met him and really, really, really liked him. And then, he had already actually retired from the firm many years before. And then I met Tony Sharippa and Dina Frank, which were the two that actually owned the firm and ran the firm, um, and worked and, essentially got an offer and figured, what the heck, let me go. This is my opportunity. We had talked about the idea that I would come in and I would very quickly run the firm and that eventually there would be some sort of ownership. And this is now going back almost 10 years. And so I came over, and to their credit, they let me really start to change the firm. And we, it had a lot of legacy, people, and I started bringing in some other people that I had worked with, and there were people here that were probably overlooked. Specifically my one partner, Bill Mandera and Scott Harrell, they were people that, we kind of formed a bond together and really started to change the culture of the firm and the types of work that we did and build it into what it's become today. And along the way, I've told this story before, but Tony Sharippa said to me, I had said to him something like, Tony, what's your plan for retirement? I think we were having like a casual conversation about it. And he said, well, nobody's ever made me an offer. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I get it. So I went back that day and that night, and I basically composed an entire offer about how I was going to buy the firm from him and from Dina and take along Bill and Scott. And we would purchase the firm from them over a period of years. And this is how we were going to do it. And, this was the valuation that, we had to get a valuation done. And eventually, again, I send this to Tony's credit. I mean, he was wonderful during that process. I hear nightmare stories of, ownership transitions and things like that. And, to Tony's credit, he wanted to retire and he understood that, essentially we were his vehicle to retirement. And that's what we did. And, over a period of years, we bought the firm from Tony, and, and he retired, and we've been running it ever since. And that's kind of how it happened. So I told this on the Business of Architecture podcast. So you never know who you're gonna, you never know if you don't ask for it, you'll never know what the response is going to be. So,
well, it also goes back to the idea of hospitality and that idea of anticipation and listening. It's really like, hey, what do you want? How can I serve you? And if you don't ask, you'll never know.
yeah.
So building on that, let's go back to you after graduate school. You're standing in front of Pauley Pavilion on campus at UCLA. I'm a Trojan, so boo. But you're standing outside Pauley Pavilion, and you, as you are today, walks up to you in front of Pauley Pavilion. You're almost finished with architecture school. What advice do you give your younger self?
That's a really good question. I think my advice would be to enjoy the journey and not be so stressed out about it along the way, that it'll all work out in the end. Not that I've written the last chapter yet, but I think that really is, for me, the moral of the story, right? Is that, buying a business this way, running a business, dealing with things that, I went to architecture school. I don't have a business degree. I'm winging it half the time. Right. And, I fully admit that. And that's okay. I've learned a lot along the way. And I think I've matured tremendously as a leader and as a business owner. And every day I learn a little bit more. But I'm always the type that's, worried about what the next thing is that's coming, or how can we be even more innovative here? Or if we're being really innovative, I almost don't enjoy the time that we're innovating. I want to know, how can we do it even more, right? How can we, maybe we're not thinking of it even innovatively enough, right? Is there something that we're missing here? So I would like to start to enjoy the journey along the way a little bit more, and not kind of worry about, exactly where we're going, that the path is not yet written, and to kind of follow that path a little bit more organically. It's okay, because that's the way it's going to work out anyway.
Yeah, it's really, being present, mindful, and just to quote a friend, the journey or the journey is the destination, right?
Yeah, it's true.
That's where we all are. And it's like, and we all get caught up in all this forward looking, backward looking, but like sometimes it's all just right here, right now.
Yep. Yeah. Someone told me, sort of the beginning of COVID, we were going through, I'm in this thing called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And in my group, we were talking about, some of the guys were, their businesses were really tanking. I mean, from supply lines being shut off to advertising going away to, um, dentists not buying materials, things like that. Right. And I was saying, in mine, well, this project stopped and that project stopped. And I remember one of the guys saying, um, no matter how bad you think it's going to get, it never gets that bad. And I will say that COVID in the end, when I look back, has actually been a really positive experience. As shitty as it was along the way, I really have learned to appreciate kind of what we've accomplished, the firm itself, the people at the firm, how we can get through adversity and then ultimately be stronger for it in the end. I think our firm is actually way better than it was before COVID. And we're only going to get better and better from here. So, kind of looking at the positive in things, but there really is a lot of positive to be thankful for in there.
Yeah. I think as we get, as COVID gets further in the rearview mirror, I think we're going to reflect on this and see it as a time of extreme creativity, a lot of white space, and like a whiteboard that basically we could rethink everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm hearing, and I'm like hearing that in all the work that you're doing and your outlook. So, thank you for sharing all of that. And if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you, Christian?
So they can find me on my LinkedIn page. Christian Giordano, just search that up. You can also find us obviously on ManciniDuffy.com. And then if you want to listen to the Anti-Architect podcast, that is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud, and I guess wherever podcasts are sold or downloaded.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Christian, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and just this journey of a conversation. It's been really enlightening, and I think we've had a lot of shared experience, and you've changed my way of thinking about hospitality as well. So, and if anyone else has had their feelings of hospitality change, or you're thinking about it a little bit differently, please share the podcast with others and reach out to Christian. And thank you. Appreciate your time.
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.